We're talking about inverse here, inverse relation. I'm going to go ahead and do several selected problems. I'm going to go ahead and read the instructions. Find the inverse of R of each relation S. Determine whether the inverse is a function. So what I want you to do, I know it says to use the inverse R, but I'm going to use a symbol. And that indicates the inverse. And we know that to find the inverse, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it larger so you can see it. To find the inverse, we're switching, remember, the x value and the y value. For instance, this would have to be -1, 3. Try to do the next one on your own. The next order pair. We know that the order pair is 5, 1. So the inverse will be 1, 5. 3, 3 will stay 3, 3 since it's the same value. The next one we have 2, 1. So what do you have to do with the x and the y value? That's correct. You have to switch. And then we have 0, -2, so you're going to have -2, 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw the curly brackets. So we have S, and we have the inverse of S. That's how you read that symbol. That's the inverse of S. If you have any questions, make sure that you do text me. We're going to go ahead and do number 4. We have X and Y in that table. I'm going to pause. So we know that the relation is -2, 7, -1, 4, 0, 3, 1, 4, and 2, 7. So I'm going to go ahead and do the inverse relation. So let's assume that this is inverse, this is S. So this will be the inverse of S. This relation is S. Right here, the table is S, and the inverse of S is shown by my table. So for example, we have -2, 7. That's the order pair. So now you have 7, -2. You have -1, 4. So now you have 4, -1. We have 0, 3. So that's going to be 3, 1. We have order pair 1, 4. So it'll be 4, 1. And then we have 2, 7, so it's going to be 7, 2. And you notice that we have 7, -2, and 7, 2. We know that the x value is repeated. There's 2 different y values. So the inverse, in this case, the inverse is not a function. For number 2, we forgot to go over whether it's a function or not, and you want to look at the x value for the inverse. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight. We have -1, we have 1, we have 3, we have 1, and we have -2. So therefore, just by looking at the different x values, we know that 1 is repeated, so the inverse is not a function. So I'm going to write the inverse is not a function. Okay. Once again, we have this relation S, and I'm going to go ahead and write the inverse. So here is the inverse symbol. That is the inverse of S. So we have 0, -9. Remember, we have the -9, 0, so the inverse is 0, -9. Then we have -3, 2. So the inverse is 2, -3. We have the inverse of -5, 4. So that will be 4, -5. We have the order pair 2, 7. So that's 7, 2. And then we have the order pair -4, 3. So it's going to be 3, -4. And so there's our inverse relation. So now we will check the x value, and do we have any x value that is paired with a different y value? In this case, it's no. So here, the inverse is a function. The inverse is a function. Number 8 is another relation. We have 3, 0, 7, 4, negative 3, 2, negative 1, negative 1. I'm going to go ahead and draw my table, which indicates the inverse relation. So if we have 3, 0, it's going to be 0, 3. 7, 4 is going to be 4, 7. Negative 3, 2 will be 2, negative 3, and we have negative 1, negative 1. That stays the same since it's both the x and the y are the same. So now you have to look at the x value, and you notice that only one x value is paired up with a y value, so this is a function. The inverse is a function. I tried to change number 10, but I couldn't. So yeah, there's two 10s. I'm going to do the two 10s. It says for each function f of x, write the equation of the inverse, then graph its inverse. Now, the only thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to graph the inverse. I'm going to show you how to find the inverse algebraically, and then you will have to graph that on your using Desmos, and you need to make sure that you have graphing paper, okay? Make sure you have graphing paper. So we have f of x equals x plus 2, and we want to get the inverse, right? So what you need to do first is you need to write y equals x plus 2. To find the inverse of this equation, y equals x plus 2, what you have to do is switch the y and the x variable. I'm going to pause. So the y is going to be the x value, or the x variable, and the x variable will be the y variable plus 2. So now your algebra techniques are going to be used here. We're going to isolate the y, so we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. And yes, you have to show your steps. So now 2 minus 2 is 0. We're left with x minus 2 is equal to y. Of course, we don't see that often like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and write the inverse. So the inverse of f is going to be x minus 2. This is not complete because you have to graph this equation and you have to graph this equation using either Desmos or your Inspire. Okay. The first equation is similar to number 11. The second equation is very similar to number 9, so that's why I'm doing two equations that are very similar to the ones to the left. So we have f of x equal 1/2 x plus 5, and once again we have to write the inverse. So what I recommend you do is you, instead of writing f of x, I recommend you write y equals 1/2 x plus 5, and that's going to help you to determine the inverse. So how is that going to help you determine the inverse? Think about it. How do we start by figuring out, identifying the inverse equation? Think about what we just finished doing. The first step that you have to do is switch the variables. So y is going to be x, and you have 1/2. Instead of x, you're going to have y plus 5, and I'm going to stop. So you notice I switched, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use different colors here to indicate my y is going to be x now, the x variable, and the x variable is going to be the y variable. So that's what it means to get the inverse of an equation. So now what you're going to go through is you're going to go through the process of solving for y. So here, just solve for y. So use your algebra techniques. You're going to go ahead and subtract 5 from both sides. So I'm going to write it awkwardly, but that's the way you need to write it. X minus 5. is equal to 1/2 y. And since we have a fraction and you're also dividing, what you're going to have to do is multiply both sides by 2. Now the 2 divided by 2 becomes 1, so y equals, and you got to multiply by 2 the left side. This goes back to having a balanced equation. If you multiply 2 on the right side, you got to multiply 2 on the left side. So now you're going to use the distributive property. So you have 2x minus 10. So here is your inverse. So to write it correctly, you have the inverse of f equals 2x minus 10. And that's how you find the inverse. Guys, if you have any questions, please text me. I went ahead and let you do, I left you with a certain amount of problems. You are required to do 1 through 12 here, but I've done 6 of them, so you're required to do 6. If you have any questions, please text me or see me during tutoring. Thank you, guys.